Justin, what's up, man?
What's up, dude?
Not much. So catching you at an interesting time. You and your co-founder Callie are kind of going viral right now, which is
it's been an insane 2 weeks.
pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Callie started tweeting about the food system and how Coke and Pepsi basically paid off the NAACP and a couple other racial justice oriented groups to reach out to basically tar legislators in certain states that were considering enacting a soda tax as racist, so that to make sure their products weren't taxed and they could continue to print a bunch of money. And that went pretty viral. So it got 15 million views. Callie was on Tucker Carlson last week. Now has 30 podcasts lined up. I went on Jesse Waters last week. It's just been crazy.
It has. And I think, you're obviously very in depth with what has been happening in the United States with our food system, the overall health of our population. There's probably a lot of people listening to this that aren't quite as attuned to it all. So would love to hear from you, just high level. Let's start with the US population health. What have you observed in your years of study of this, of what is going on?
Yeah, so I tweeted something yesterday or 2 days ago that was, I think, interesting, which is basically that if you look in 1990, there was sort of this nationwide survey that was done around 1990 around percentage of adults that were obese. So in 1990, there were 0 states in the US with obesity rates above 20%. 2018, so 28 years later, we're looking at, there were 0 states with obesity rates below 20%. So in the 28-year period that we're looking at, basically we have gone as a country from obesity being a thing that was not common to now it is common. We're around 42% of adults in the US are obese. About 72% are overweight. The average American in the US is just metabolically broken and not functioning at a high level, which is also why you're seeing exploding rates of chronic disease, inflammation, all these different kinds of things. And so I think, though people would disagree with me, that the reason that we're seeing this massive explosion in obesity, overweight, is that our food system is completely broken. And every time the average person interacts with our food system, they walk away sicker rather than healthier. The average thing that you consume in a grocery store or buy at a restaurant is likely to be highly processed, full of sugars, preservatives, seed oils, pesticides, all these sorts of things, all of which contribute to really negative human health, which is why I think the country is just breaking down from a health standpoint.
And I want to stress, it's not just the overweight thing. Just so people understand what we're looking at here. You've shown me things like male fertility, plummeting immensely. Obviously anxiety and depression, which through the roof. It's pretty unbelievable. And I know there's a lot of people like me where I hear this and I'm like, yeah, but I buy organic, I shop at Whole Foods, I'm doing a lot of the right things, that they think they're safe from this. And what I would be interested, because I know you've gone deep here, is what say you as someone who, has done lots of research around what's even happening with these foods?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a fair call out to say that this isn't just an obesity overweight issue. I think that this is a disease issue, and obesity is just one symptom of a metabolism that's not functioning at a high level. You look in the wild and no animals are obese or overweight unless it's strategic for them from a hibernation standpoint. And yet when you see I've been tweeting about this health and wellness stuff, and people have called me fat phobic or fat shaming or anything like this. And I don't think that I'm not saying anything bad about any individual person that may struggle with their weight. I just think at a population level, it's crazy that obesity is super tightly coupled and correlated to all sorts of chronic disease, early death, heart disease, cancers, all these things. I think it's crazy that we're just cool. This metric has like doubled, more than doubled in 28 years. And like, we can't talk about it because it might hurt people's feelings. The other thing that you brought up a good point is like, this is not just obesity that you're seeing. It's also hormones. It's like impacted hormones. So the average 22-year-old male today has the same testosterone as that of the average 67-year-old just 20 years ago in the year 2000. So like, if you're 22 today, you're basically walking around with the T levels that your grandpa had, when you were growing up, which is just not extremely high. So it's really insane. And I think that unfortunately, even if you buy at Whole Foods, even if you buy organic, they're great steps to take. I think that because our environment is so stacked against us, there's a lot more stuff that the average person has to do to kind of be aware of the impact that these environmental chemicals, different sugars, preservatives, pesticides, all these things kind of have. Like one concerning thing was the EPA recently did a survey of streams, rivers, and lakes in the US. And they found that 93% of streams, rivers, and lakes in the US had some sort of like microplastic or PFAS contamination. So it's getting to the point where this stuff is like a really urgent issue. And even if you're buying at Whole Foods, even if you're shopping organic, even whatever, these things are still like coming for you and can cause health problems in your life, unfortunately.
I mean, I feel it, dude. I have been someone, you know me, I've been like a biohacker, health optimizer for the past 10, 15 years. And to be honest, sometimes it feels like a dogfight just to feel good.
Yep.
And it's really freaking annoying, to be honest. And I think there's a lot of reasons there. I think there's a lot of, things that I've kind of went through that are manifesting physically, but I also do think there are some things like my environmental exposure that really make this feel like an uphill battle. One of the things, interesting stats that you shared that I thought was pretty wild was around the pesticides, and specifically that 25% of the things that are commonly used to grow food in the US are illegal in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Illegal. Like, you're not even allowed to use them. Don't forget advice. Like, you're not allowed to use them, yet that is what we're using to even grow our organic food. And then moreover, a lot of this is like in the soil of the products that even the organic stuff is grown in.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so I wrote in my newsletter about just digging into this idea of like, there's something that some friends and some other people I know have asked about, which is, why is it that I go to Europe and I drink more, I eat more pasta, I like eat bread, I do whatever, and I feel better than I do after meals in the US. And I've had that experience too. I was in France last summer and had the exact same feeling. And I think that the reason is, I think there's probably many reasons, but one of them I certainly think is pesticide load. Like as you said, about a quarter of all pesticides sprayed on crops to the tunes of like hundreds of millions of pounds a year in the US are not allowed in Europe. European sort of the European chemical safety kind of regulating body over there takes the approach where they say, hey, if you are a manufacturer or a pesticide company or someone using a new chemical, we are going to require a large series of like safety studies to be done. And we're going to like use what's called the precautionary principle. And so this idea is basically like, we don't know what these chemicals are going to do when they make their way into the food system and into people's bodies. And so we're going to be cautious about what we allow into our bodies. The FDA on the other side takes the opposite approach of, basically anything that gets something called a GRAS, generally recognized as safe designation, which is very easy to get. You can basically run your own studies. So I, Monsanto, or I, whoever, can basically run my own studies and say, okay, this chemical based on this one study that I did looks safe. I'm going to submit it for GRAS designation to the FDA. The FDA goes, great. You're a company, we totally trust you and trust that you know what you're doing when you say that this chemical that we're about to apply to the tune of hundreds of billions of pounds a year, will not have any long-term health ramifications. And basically, like, they go, great, go for it, use it, spray it, whatever. And I think that results in in most American foods, like a much, much higher pesticide residue amount of pesticides that are used in our foods, far higher than in Europe and other places that actually have what I would call like a sensible regulation policy around a bunch of these chemicals that are added to our food system. And that's not even to mention, like, if you look at nutrient density of crops and fertility of soil, like, not only are people becoming infertile, many more people are having trouble getting pregnant, fertility rates are on the decline, but our soils are literally becoming less fertile. We're requiring like more and more pounds of fertilizer per acre of yield than ever before. Like, if you look at how much fertilizer needs to get added to our soils, added to our cropland to have the same yields, like, we need more fertilizer to get the same output. And that is basically a function of topsoil that's degrading, soil fertility going down, carbon in our soils sort of like disappearing, a bunch of micronutrients in our soils disappearing, all which leads to less nutrient dense crops as well.
So, I guess a question that to me feels blatantly obvious, but I have to at least ask is, I mean, why is this happening? Is this because of big companies just trying to make money?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening for a couple of reasons. I basically think that now it's certainly like big companies trying to make money. I think that when, a lot of our food policy basically started during World War II, when not our food policy, but a lot of these food companies like started, these like agriculture and chemical companies started during World War II, or really scaled up during the World War II era, where we basically had a time where it was like, okay, we need to make a bunch of food that is both shelf stable. We can like make it here, ship it overseas. It won't go bad. We need to make sure that we're not losing any sort of like crop, because we need every calorie we can. Like, there were a bunch of food restrictions and whatnot in the World War II era, so that we could like supply soldiers and our allies, overseas and whatnot. And basically this system got created and built up where you could apply chemicals to very fertile soils and increase yields. You could add different preservatives to bread, to like different foods. You could process them really for the first time, and it would make sure that these foods wouldn't spoil. Like, all these things were sort of miracles at the time, and they sort of came about in a time where those things were really important. I think what's happened now, though, is a real shame in that rather than having World War II end, these companies have realized that it's just much more profitable to sell a addictive food product that has been highly, highly processed using super low quality ingredients. It's much more profitable to sell a jar of tomato sauce or something like that has flavorings and sugar and a bunch of other stuff in it than it is to like sell a tomato that's a commodity crop where there's a lot of competition, and basically the inputs and outputs are practically free. And so you have a bunch of these like food companies that found processing food means higher profits. And you have a bunch of ag companies that, like Bayer, which now owns Monsanto, that have basically been working on developing certain lines of genetics, like seeds, that where they plant them, call it like Monsanto plants a certain type of seed that only they sell. They have a patent on the genetic strain of that wheat. And that wheat strain is engineered to work best with the type of pesticide that they spray. So they sell the pesticide, they sell the seed, and they make money kind of on both sides. And when those things, when as a farmer, if you've bought several $1 million worth of Monsanto seed and your yields are going down, well, you don't really have a choice but to buy more fertilizer. It's kind of like you're stuck. And I think that's where Bayer, Monsanto like have a lot of farmers right now. Is they're selling a bunch of fertilizer, they're selling a bunch of seeds, and they're making a ton of money doing so, even though it comes at the cost of the average consumer's health.
One of the things I was thinking about the other day, and I think thinking a lot about this, but is there going to come a point in time where, as Americans, we have to choose all right, I want to make it easy for my family to be healthy and potentially move to another country, some remote place where we can grow food, where we don't have all these environmental toxins, or I want to be in, a vibrant city or, community like that. It kind of feels like that's where things are heading.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that there's already a lot of interest now in these sorts of like moving or living in places where being healthy isn't so hard. I think there's interest now, and I think there's going to continue to be more interest as the country as a whole becomes sicker, and as the average person gets sicker and sicker, and the average nutrient density of our food goes down, the average amount of pesticides someone's consuming goes up, all these things sort of happen. I think that there is going to be like a lot of demand for people moving to enclaves where they don't have to struggle so hard and try so hard to be healthy. I do though think also that is tough. It's tough. Like probably you're not going to get everyone to move out of the US. This is probably going to be a thing that only certain elites can do, or elites can afford to buy all of their meat and other produce and stuff from New Zealand or wherever kind of stuff is relatively free of these different things. But yeah, man, it's definitely something I've thought about and something that's super concerning in general.
What are the other, and I want to kind of start to talk a little, make sure to plug TrueMed. Like what are the pathways out of this?
I think
are like realistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a huge incentives problem in the US at first. Like if you think about it, so the US spends, I think it's over $10 billion a year or something like that on corn, soy, and wheat subsidies. So they basically, like, the USDA spends a bunch of money to make corn, soy, wheat artificially cheap. As a result, corn, soy, and wheat make their way into everything. This is why high fructose corn syrup is used instead of sugar, because it's artificially cheap. This is why wheat has made its way into everything, like soy sauce, dressings, like all sorts of things, again, artificially cheap. And this is why soybeans, in America, we consume massive amounts of soybean oil, because soybeans have been made artificially cheap. We grow them, 90% of them we either ship abroad or just don't even eat the soybeans. We just use them for soybean oil or some sort of like ethanol or fuel. It's just like a crazy system. And so I think from a policy standpoint, it's really important that we fix these subsidies that are causing like these highly, highly processed frankenfoods to end up in almost every product that we have in the US. I also think that there's opportunities to fix incentives so that basically people are, when they buy food, they're investing in their health rather than paying for something when they're sick. And that's where what we're doing with TrueMed, we're starting a company basically that makes it easy for someone like you to, assuming you talk to a doctor and you qualify, you can basically use your HSA or FSA funds to invest in things that fall in the bucket of like health and wellness from a prevention standpoint. So things like healthy food, exercise, supplements, all these certain things. Like the IRS, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, is like the IRS has basically created these tax-free health savings accounts, HSAs and FSAs, where they want to incentivize Americans to put aside money tax-free and invest it in things that improve their health. For many people, that means paying for surgeries or pills. We're basically helping companies that sell things that fall into this bucket of like health and wellness, and addressing medical and health issues before you get acutely sick. Companies that sell supplements, that sell saunas, cold plunge, certain mattresses, healthy foods, things like this. We believe that they should also be able to sell their products and sell health. And so consumers should be able to use the funds that are in their HSA and FSA account to buy these services.
Yeah. And I'm personally a big fan of HSA, FSA. I'm also a TrueMed customer. What up? And part of the reason is because for the best quality services, me, I'm in the alternative acupuncture and Reiki, and like even buying from farmers and stuff. And that's not covered on my insurance. In most cases. And so I got to pay out of pocket. And if I'm going to pay out of pocket, I might as well save a few bucks and use the pre-tax dollars through the HSA FSA. So if you haven't really like looked at that or seen if your company offers it, I knew I always kind of blew it off because it seemed like a headache, but it just increasingly like being healthy is expensive. And this is a simple way to save some money. Which I think is like a huge enabler.
The thing is like, it's crazy. The average person, in order to be healthy, has to spend so much of their own hard-earned money just to like tread water. You know what I mean? Like just to not get chronically ill requires you spend a bunch of your own money and a bunch of your own time and a bunch of your own research on figuring out how do I remain healthy. And I think that is totally insane. And it doesn't surprise me that the average person is sick when being healthy is so fucking hard.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, I actually was talking to my acupuncture about this week, and we were talking about how actually like what he believes is that detoxification is going to become like the way that we get through this. Like we have to become masters of detox. And so, because even if you try really hard, there's still stuff in the air, there's still stuff in the water. I mean, there's just stuff everywhere. Like you can't avoid it. And one of the interesting things that he shared with me, is that there are actually recent studies, and I know you're going to go and add this to your to-do list because I know you to read out, but that people they've been testing activated charcoal, which is typically a detoxification method used in emergency situations like hospitals. Maybe some people use it by drinking, but amongst animals that they were giving it to every single day across a large cross section, the animals that were given activated charcoal were living 40% longer. And it was because the binder in the charcoal is just so effective at detoxifying. And I'm really interested in this, and I'm really in sauna and all these other things, because what also is apparent to me is that our natural detoxification system, which is, you know, sweating, going to the bathroom, because so many people's gut health is jacked up, there's a lot of people that have toxins sitting in their system for way longer than they need to.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to me, that's like another kind of strategy that people can think about is okay, what are different ways I can, you know, make sure that I'm detoxifying, and how do I build that into my life?
What did he say was useful from like a detox standpoint? Because I think that definitely that is true and an important thing. I think that basically people's systems are not working as well as they once were from a detox standpoint. And I also think that the amount of toxins that the average person is exposed to on a daily basis has gone massively up. Again, thanks in part to some of the FDA's policies that I outlined earlier. So
he said activated charcoal. The other thing that he said was, you know, a lot of us have parasites, and parasites make it harder for everything to work well. And so he recommended supplementing with copper, and that copper supplementation is a kind of a catch-all for all parasites. And so if you do he does 2 weeks of copper supplementation every quarter. And many of his patients, when he's done this, you know, they've went to the bathroom and there was like a bunch of worms in their stool after a couple of days. And I've went through that myself, and it is truly miserable. I'm actually on a copper detox right now. And this is another one of those substances that, you know, back in the early 1900s, because someone at my gym was trying to get me on to copper supplementation a while ago. You know, this just used to be in our foods. Like we just used to have a lot of copper in our food. And now I think relative to like the 1950s, we're getting like 1/50th the amount of copper that we were getting through food back then. Yeah. And there was like some alleged, you know, study or something about like copper being bad or whatever it is. But in a lot of the homeopathic, naturopathic circles, you know, they just recognize it's a huge deficiency. And because we're deficient of it, we're increasingly having lots of pathogens and parasites and things that our body used to heal through food. And now it's harder for us to do that.
Totally. I mean, I think that two things are going on here. Is one, like our food is getting both less nutrient dense, which means that we're getting fewer of these like minerals and vitamins and nutrients and stuff that we need. And I think secondly, like our diets have also changed. Like a lot of people, if you look at traditional cultures and how they used to eat, things like organ meats were sort of incorporated in almost every culinary cultural tradition. In many countries you would have sweetbreads, livers and onion, like kidney. There's a bunch of things that you would eat on a regular basis that were really, really high in a bunch of these like metals, nutrients, things like that. And basically like we don't eat those anymore. And so I think that that's the other thing that's driving a lot of deficiencies is so many people have been drawn to easy, high carb, high sugar, highly processed, foodstuffs that are really devoid of like almost any nutritional content.
Yeah. It's like, how many people are just eating bars?
Totally.
Don't get me wrong. I love me a good perfect keto bar, but we're not connected to the food. We're not connected to the nature. And so we're getting these like derivatives versus the real thing.
Totally. And I think that people will eat this way for a long period of time. They'll start to experience symptoms. And only when they start to experience symptoms will they do anything about addressing these things. And so many times you'll have people with decades and decades of nutrient deficiencies that are just starting to like address them via supplementation or whatnot. And I think that if you have years and years of these, some sort of nutrient deficiency or a nutrient deficiency that means that you got a parasite, which means that you have X, Y, and Z health condition, like some of these things are just really hard to put back in the bag once they've started to have negative health consequences start to spiral. Yeah.
One thing that I'm very personally interested in, I just read a book by a Vietnamese monk on anger. He's very famous. I think his name is like Think Na or something. I forget what it is, but he's a very famous monk. And he talked about how, and this is not the first time I've heard this. I've heard this from many people that are kind of in the spiritual, esoteric world, is that, we take on the emotions of our food. And if you think about the food that we consume today, which is, a zillion chickens inside of a room that could fit 5 people, and all the practices that we actually have with our meats to get this food, I mean, they're just in terrible conditions. And I think there's so many factors why there's so much mental illness. The presence of phones. I've been a huge advocate of the fact that our nervous system has so many more just stressors on it, just through all of the stuff with electronics and everything from like our phones in our hands to the waves in the air to all of this stuff. But also, like our food actually, that's an interesting thing that a lot of wise people talk about, and it's not really acknowledged by modern science or anything today, but it is something that I certainly don't think is helping the cause.
I mean, something that I am really interested in right now and want to talk more about is, not necessarily here, but I'm just like interested in this topic.
Oh, dude, talk. This is page.
But I think to me, one of the most interesting things in the world is the link between physiological well-being, so like your physical health, and your mental health and your sort of emotional health. Like diabetes is extraordinarily tightly coupled with things like depression and anxiety. ADHD and things like this are also very tightly coupled with blood sugar dysregulation and lack of like metabolic health. I think that like a big reason that we're seeing the explosion in like mental health disorders that we're seeing today
is because people are just like fundamentally at a biological level less healthy. And if your like little meat sack is not in a good place, your gut bacteria where 90+%, or your gut where like 90+% of the body's serotonin is produced is not in a good place, your physical capacity to feel more positive emotions, your nervous system's ability to not be inflamed and to feel a sense of like peace and calm and all these sorts of things, as opposed to one of anxiety and depression, is literally like it has less capacity for feeling amazing, for feeling calm, for feeling like not anxious. And this is a thing that I think is potentially like a root cause issue in terms of why we're seeing so much like strife and polarization and unhappiness and depression and anxiety that exists in our society today. And I feel like, I don't know, I like sometimes feel like, to the man with a hammer, like everything is nailed. Like I'm kind of like know a lot about food stuff. And so I just see that as like a root cause problem in everything. But this is definitely an area that I've been digging into and feel like very strongly it is a really big issue.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like there's unequivocally a relationship between mental, emotional health and physical health. And what you're kind of saying is that poor physical health makes it difficult to have positive and mental and emotional health, which then subsequently makes physical health even harder. I mean, it's my belief that coming from the more energetic spiritual lens, that it actually goes the other way too, where the repressed emotions are initially kind of energetic in your energetic body. And then eventually if that continues to be repressed, then it eventually manifests physically. And there's a lot of, one of the guys who's on the podcast circuit right now, Gabor Mate, I don't know.
Yeah.
He wrote The Body Says No. I actually don't like that book. I like the premise of the book, but like every single, because it's just like a zillion examples of people with cancer. It's like, oh, this person repressed this and then they got cancer. This person repressed this and then they got cancer. This person, I'm like, this is depressing as shit to read. But in premise, I agree with it. As well as books like The Anatomy of the Spirit. I mean, there's so many of these different books, but I feel like I have personally experienced health coincident with being out of alignment in my life. For example, like being at my startup when I didn't want to be there anymore and my health eventually going to shit. And then positive gains in health when I've addressed root cause emotions like anger that I wasn't even aware of until I was able to process it, and other things. And a very simple example of this is look at people's states after they lose someone they love. I mean, it's not really like rocket scientists, but most people aren't thriving physically when they're going through grief or depression. Is the body responding to the physicality, or is it responding to the emotions? And so I think there is this symbiotic relationship, like circular relationship on both fronts, which is why I think managing both is so important.
I totally agree. I think something that I think about, and I'd love to hear more about why, what your thoughts are on The Body Says No and some of these other things. But when I talk to some people that have read about and talked about those books, to me, I look at like, why are rates of chronic disease, obesity, and overweight like exploding in the last 60 years in an era where arguably there was like less trauma and less physical trauma and less other things than in sort of previous times, whereas you're seeing a lot of I think that's just my question is like, if you have a take.
Yeah, it is interesting. Well, so I don't know about there's so many variables, right? Like one thing that a couple things that I think about like modern man today in regards to like emotional regulation. Like one, I actually do think there's a lot more negative emotions. They're just repressed. So like, think about the idea that we have a phone that we can just open it up at any single time and see how much people are better than us. all freaking day. Think about how easy it is to feel like you're not good enough in today's society.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like in your face. Like we talked about this, like think about the idea that, you know, in chat rooms and messages, like, or whatever, like someone could just call you a piece of shit and make you feel terrible. Like we never had all of that. And so we have all of these additional factors that could make us feel like crap, even though we maybe don't live in as much of a brutish society. But it's not, to me, it's like the thing that is the illness is like the lack of expression and acknowledgement. And so it's not like the presence of positive or good. It's, do we let it pass through our system? And in many ways, like our society has allowed, for example, males it's okay to be more in touch with your emotions now than it used to be. At the same time, we have a lot of people, we live in a culture where we can't say what we think anymore. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is if you look at, for example, thyroid disease in cultures that are repressive, like Iran, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, to women, it's like 90% of women have thyroid issues there. And the thyroid is associated, if you look at it from a psychosomatic perspective, like the throat, the thyroid, it's associated with expression. So the lack of your ability to express would manifest in illness in that part of your body. And so to me, like there are very fascinating correlations in these different populations of psychosomatic health, where some type of suppression of expression, whether that's anger, whether it's, you know, your voice, whether it's fear, whether whatever, like is correlated with illness. And in regards to our society, like I feel like I grew up with the idea that anger was not allowed. The anger was bad. You were an unsophisticated person. And if you listen to someone like Dr. Gabor Mate, what does he say? He's like, most people with cancer have anger that's unexpressed. And so like, were we 30, 40 years ago able to kind of more freely express our anger? I don't know, maybe. Mm-hmm. Right. It's hard, man. It's like, but I definitely can say like, I have noticed, like, I literally feel things move in my body when I deal with a lot of these, like this giant well of basically subconscious emotions and things that have been repressed. And I feel physical changes that are undeniable. And so I just think I think these are all just parts of the pie.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. It's actually an area where, you know, I asked you your thoughts on it. When I ask a hard question, I'm like actually interested in learning more. I'm not saying that I think that Gabor Mate or any of this is like totally unrelated to disease. I just find it, I find it interesting, and it's something that I want to just like better understand, because I do think that one of the most common things that I just like think about and ask myself is like, why is everyone getting sick all the time? And why are we as a society like sick and getting sicker? And I think that understanding that is like possibly the most important question that we can answer as a society today. Because I think right now the base case is we're just like lighting human capital on fire and creating unbelievable amounts of like misery and happiness, depression, anxiety, all sorts of things that I think are just really bad. Not ideal.
Yeah. There's another one of my theses, and, like I sleep in a Faraday tent. There's a book called, it's like something, The Rainbow. And it's basically about the history of electricity. And in that book, they cite like all of these people that lived close to like electric towers, like dying early, their kids getting sick. Like there was just all of these stressors on these people that were related to illness. And that is another big change in our society that, guess what? Like no institution or large company wants to say, hey guys, phones are terrible for you. Wi-Fi shit, all the things on all the electronics, all the things you use in your house, like that's all impacting you. And like, it kind of breaks our entire way of living. But that book and my own sensitivity, which is developed, the higher sensitivity comes, I mean, for me, it came after the Kundalini awakening, but like it's increasingly happening to a lot of people as they go through spiritual transition where they can start to feel this stuff. Like that to me is a whole unexamined part of our society where it's passively putting stress on the nervous system at all times that previously we did not need to live with. And if the nervous system is messed up and the nervous system is going through it, then the whole body suffers because it's really the governing body of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, interestingly enough, there's a fair body of research on you're basically putting your phone in your pocket and its impact on your testosterone and other sort of like sperm count. Like that's actually a fairly well documented effect. What
does it say?
Basically, like, do you know Andrew Huberman?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's coming out with a podcast on this, on EMFs and the like. But effectively, the body of research around EMFs, as far as I see it, and like he tweeted about this a couple of days ago, seems to be strongest around specifically your phone in your front pocket having like a pretty strong impact on, I believe it's sperm count and testosterone levels, which I just think is like fascinating and a thing that people don't talk about much. I mean, personally, like having looked into some of the EMF stuff, I would love to do a deeper dive into it at some point. I think that like frequency, range, and like strength of signal really matter quite a lot. Like probably having a phone next to your, next to your genitals is like not a great move. But like how big of a difference does it make having, Wi-Fi in your house or something where a router is a couple rooms away? Like, I'm not sure. But I definitely think it is a factor that people are not really weighing into any of their calculations when it comes to like health and wellness.
Yeah, I agree big time. And I think for me, like, this is going to sound kind of, I don't know, controversial, but the reality is most humans are not in touch with their energy body. They can't feel it. They don't know it exists. It's like not a thing. It's like this weird woo-woo thing. It's like, I can tell you it's freaking real because I have, I experience it regularly. And it's almost like my acupuncturist talked about it. He's like, before you were driving a Mazda and you could put in on crappy unleaded gas. Now you're driving a Maserati, which is much more sensitive. And so you can't put crappy gas in it. You have to take it to the shop a lot more. You have to be much more careful about it than previously. And so it is more high performance, but it comes at a cost. And I think for me, like, that's manifested in things like my reaction to alcohol, my reaction to caffeine, my reaction to gluten. Like I just became incredibly sensitive, physically, energetically. I can feel things. And so like, I almost wonder, like, to me, that's where the realness of it all comes from. And I almost wonder, is it a thing that you're perhaps not aware of, or maybe even subject to until that part of the experience comes online? And it's very hard for scientists to really acknowledge that, because the reality is most of them are out of touch with it, if not all of them, or many of them, except for maybe the people that are at the emergent quantum physics that are recognizing the world of energy. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. And for anybody out there, like, I think the best thing anyone can always do with all this stuff is just experiment on yourself.
Yep. I totally agree.
Turn your Wi-Fi off at night. Like, I gotta tell you, one of the funniest things is I had the Shielded Healing guys who are an EMF specialist come over and do a documentary or thing at my house. And they're like, yeah, we told a lot of our patients to turn their Wi-Fi off at night and turn their phones off. And like the amount of texts I get from men being like, I haven't had an erection like this in the morning for like 10 to 15 years is amazing. And
wow.
I'm like, okay, well, that's a pretty easy test. for
That's amazing.
guys out there. Like, see what it's done. So, and the same goes for all the food stuff. At the end of the day, like everyone's just sharing what a very limited perspective from their own subjective view. And, you got to try things yourself.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I know who's turning off his Wi-Fi later. Well, look, man, this has been epic. Thank you so much. You're a wealth of information and a dear friend. And dude, I just love hearing you talk about this stuff. Your company is amazing. So is your Substack, which is where I honestly learn a lot about this stuff because you're such a thorough researcher. Why don't you just share with everybody if they want to, follow TrueMed, follow the next, like whether they can do that?
Yeah. So if you want to find, you can Google Justin Mayer's Substack or Justin Mayer's the next. It's justinmayers.substack.com. Also True Medicine, you can find at truemedicine.care. We're working on buying a better domain name, but it's truemedicine.care for now. Yeah. So that's where you can find me. And then I'm like getting more active on Twitter at JW Mayers as well.
Oh yeah. Tweet storms. Here we go. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. If you like the show, like it, subscribe, send it to a friend, and we appreciate you. Lots of love to everybody. Take care.